Welcome to Hamilton County Newsmakers. I'm Perry Williams, and it's great to be out here today on this cool but sunny day here in Noblesville. But as my guest today, I have Bill Etherton. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you very much, sir, for inviting me.
Oh, appreciate it. Bill, you've written a book called Good Night, Good Sports, and I think that's your closing line.
Yes, it was.
It was. Let's talk a little bit about you and how it came about, you working with the Notre Dame organization.
Well, I was a big fan of the Irish when I was a young man, and always followed Notre Dame. And at that time, Frank Leahy was the coach right after the war. And after I was discharged from service, I was fortunate enough to get a job at a radio station in South Bend. And subsequently after that, I became the sports director at WNDU TV in South Bend. And everything took off from there because it was fulfilling a childhood dream to get in a toy store, as we used to call it, and have something you really were dedicated and enjoying very much. And in the beginning, our football teams at Notre Dame were not too impressive, but a little later, a young man from Northwestern who would beat us like a drum when we went to Evanston, Illinois to play there, Ara Parsegian, became the coach, and we had some very great years there. I was there about 15 plus years in basketball play-by-play and football play-by-play, and a myriad of high school basketball and football games. And so it's been a great career, and I've been in dialysis for a little while. And my wife Jody said, "Hey, why don't you use your time and do something with what your background might be?" So that's how this book came about, Good Night and Good Sports, with which I used to sign off all of my broadcasts and telecasts.
Well, that's really great. A little bit. Let's talk a little bit about. I know if anybody knows anything about football, probably if you polled everybody in the country, even people who are not sports fans, I would think most people would know about Notre Dame football. It would be pretty hard pressed to find someone that didn't know about Notre Dame football, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I would. And it's interesting you asked me that question because we had some bad years, as I mentioned, and then Ara Parsegian came in, and the year before he came over, our record was 2-6, and before that there were some non-winning seasons as well. And so Ara came over, and virtually the same team in 1964. We were unbeaten until the final game against Southern California in Los Angeles, and there was a chance from a 2-6 to win the national championship. And at that time, it was a situation in which we had like maybe 3 minutes left in the game. We were at 17-14, and the Southern California team had the ball on our 45-yard line, and their quarterback on the 3rd and 8. I know all these stats now pretty well. And dropped back to pass, and he threw a Hail Mary, and the guy who caught it was covered by one of our defensive halfbacks who had had the most interceptions that year. But unfortunately, when Tony Carey turned to go after him, he tripped and fell. We lost 21-17, lost the national championship. And Ara went in the locker room, and so did I, and a number of other people from the press, and we talked about what a letdown this was from having a chance to do so very much. But 65 came around, and we had a pretty good year. But in 1966, we won the national championship after the tie with Michigan State, which has echoed forever around football halls. And it was a very thrilling game. That's one I did not do. It was a national telecast, and I sat up there in the booth at East Lansing with the governor at that time, George Romney, in the next booth. And he was yelling, and I'm sort of yelling and screaming in the booth next door. I can't say anything on the air, It's a national telecast with my friends Chris Schenkel and Bud Wilkinson. And so we go through the game, and it was a heart stopper, as you know. And some great players went on to play pro football. Jim Lynch from our team, Terry Hanratty, whom you may know.
Great quarterback.
Rocky Blyer was there at that time
Great
as well.
running back.
And George Webster from Michigan State and the great Bubba Smith. So I hope I'm not taking much of a monologue here, but that's
No, you're doing fine. This is exactly the way I wanted to go. The way I wanted to do this.
Well, this one of the stories in the book also, of which I'm very fond, and so is my wife Jody, is the one about Rocky Bleier. At Notre Dame, when we have celebrities come in, they're given an honor of taking the ball from the Notre Dame dugout on the west side of the field to the northeast corner where the Irish Guard, and they're always tall and impressive with the costumes, raised the colors to the anthem. But as they walk across the field with the colors, the America the Beautiful is played. And so this time, Rocky Bleier, who had come back from Vietnam terribly wounded, and I had interviewed him the night before, and like I have a cane, and he had a cane too at that time, but he had been told that he would never walk normally again, let alone do anything else. And in my interview on Friday night, he said, I'm not going to buy that program, I'm going to do something else. So as you know, the history is that Rocky Bleier went on to become a 4-time Super Bowl winner with Franco Harris and Terry Bradshaw.
Absolutely.
And the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it was a very touching, I don't think there was a dry eye in the place when he was walking across the field that time.
Yeah, he was an amazing athlete. You know, the one thing you brought up, and it's amazing, I was listening to a radio talk show, sports talk show that I'm quite hooked on, but last week they were talking about that tie game that Era chose to go for the tie rather for the win. And of course, this was on the SCC network. Okay, it was a radio show by Paul Feinbaum, and he was talking about how that cost Bear Bryant and Alabama the national championship. So there was a discussion about that, and amazing that you bring that up today. And you know, so the things that you're talking about, and you're talking about this book, are things that people are still talking about on radio today.
Well, I have a few comments about that game in the chapter, and it's interesting. They talked about Era not doing much when we got the ball at the end, but before that in the game, Duffy Daugherty had the ball with Michigan State at about their 45-yard line, and he had a great quarterback, a very healthy quarterback, in the Jimmy Ray, and some fine receivers. And he had 4 downs, and this is before we got the ball. So he chose to keep the ball on the ground. He didn't pass, and after the game, a lot of people said, why didn't you go long against Notre Dame when you had the ball? Well, they ran the 3 downs and punted to us. At that time, we had a quarterback by the name of Coley O'Brien. Hanratty had been hurt pretty badly in the beginning of the game on a tackle by Bubba Smith. As a matter of fact, Bubba almost buried him in the ground. And so Coley came in. Coley was a diabetic, and he played a lot of that game. And at the end, in our final series of downs, he threw a couple of passes, and they were very errant. They were nowhere near the receiver. And Era felt after the game that he had to take no chances to blow the whole thing at that time with the tie game on the line to let Coley O'Brien try and pass, which was a natural way to go for some Hail Marys at the end of the game. But we did run a wide sweep at the end before the end of the game for about 10, 15 yards. But that's the reason, and I always felt, that's the reason Era was criticized, but I always felt, and I write in my book, Duffy had the chance to do the same thing, and he chose not to. And so we got a lot of controversy about why we didn't, but we had a substantial reason because we had a quarterback
that was
with no backup who was really fading badly at that time. The following week, we went to L.A., and Coley O'Brien was the quarterback full-time because Hanratty couldn't play. And he was a healthy guy at that time, and we won that game 59-0. So it sort of cemented the fact that we didn't have an outstanding football team that year. But
now,
I remember Alabama.
Was John McKay, was he with USC. Who coached?
Yes, John McKay.
Yeah, he
At
was
that
coach
time.
at that time.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a break, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes here, and let our sponsors and pay the bills a little bit, and we'll be right back, and we'll take a break, and we'll talk more with Bill Etherton about Notre Dame.
When Margaret and I decided to sell the old estate here, we had only one choice in signage: Logan Street signs and banners. Conveniently not located on Logan Street anymore, but rather located on 10th Street on the south side of Noblesville. Well, we sold the old beauty, and we were able to buy this wonderful estate. And we had so much money left over, I was able to buy this beautiful 1968 Eldorado Cadillac for Margaret. Only 472,000 miles. Margaret loves it because it's got those big seats and that heavy-duty suspension to support her svelte frame. Next time you're looking for signs or banners, call old Jim at Logan Street Signs and Banners, 773-7200. Conveniently not located on Logan Street anymore.
Everyone knows it's easy to find first-run movies in the big theaters. But where can you go to watch your favorite classic movies on the big screen for the perfect night out? Why rent a flick when you can rent the entire theater? Call today to reserve our 32-seat theater for your next event, or just stop by to see what's showing this weekend. The 14 by 7 foot screen and the high quality digital surround sound system offers all the amenities you would expect from the big theaters, with a laid back atmosphere and comfortable seating of your own home. Wofford Theater at 1744 South 10th Street in Noblesville gives you the classic movies you want with a big theater experience.
We're back here on Hamilton County Newsmakers, and if you missed the first session here, you'll have to watch it on demand, because fascinating gentleman and Bill Etherton talking about Notre Dame football and Notre Dame as a whole. And his book is called Good Night, Good Sports, okay? And it's it'll be on sale on Amazon.
Amazon.com under books.
Okay.
And it's under my name, Bill Etherton, or Good Night and Good Sports.
Okay. And that's on sale now?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to give a great plug for that. But let's talk a little bit about Notre Dame and the football. And one thing that you'll see here, Bill, throughout this book, through Notre Dame, you got to meet some very, very interesting people.
I was very fortunate.
Yeah. I mean, and not only at Notre Dame, like people like Paul Hornung, but the President Ronald Reagan and different things. So let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the old players at Notre Dame, like the Golden Boy, Paul Hornung, and his career there, and of course.
He won the Heisman Trophy, too.
That's right. He won the Heisman, and talk a little bit about Ronald Reagan and those things, those doors that really was open to you through Notre Dame football.
Traveling with the Irish, and I wanted to mention this and give a promotion push for Big Brothers. When I came to Indianapolis, I went to work for a car dealer doing advertising and for media, radio and television, and one year we decided to start a campaign, and we used Paul Hornung. So I called him down to Louisville, and Paul came up and did commercials for us here. Later on, I became involved with the Big Brothers because of the car dealer, and they were down on funds cut by United Way one year. So they asked me into the board of directors if I had any suggestions about raising money. So my proposal was to do a dinner, and I would bring in some celebrities and limit the tickets and charge them a lot of money. The ticket program, yeah. So I proposed the first one. We had Chris Schenkel and Paul Hornung, and they came in, and we had 200 tickets we sold at $200 a piece. and we gave substantial gifts away, but it was the beginning of a 7-year spread in which I shared the dinner, and I brought in people, you mentioned people I had met, Frank Gifford, Dandy Don Meredith, Howard Cosell. Cosell was really he came really nice guy. My impression on TV was not quite what he was in person. He's a really nice guy, and he came in the one day and to the Mura Temple, and he said, "Any press here?" And I said, "No." "Any press?" "No." I said, No press. And everything is closed." And he said, "Everything's off the record." And I said, "Yes." He said, "Good. Give me a double martini, quick." And we had a number of speakers who were very good. And Johnny Wooden is one I met. It's sort of interesting. Johnny Wooden coached at South Bend Central.
Right.
And then he went to Indiana State, and then, of course, to UCLA. Well, when my friend Bill Stark, whom I mentioned in the book, he kept stats for me for 15 years, so like a brother, you know. And we used to stop at a place after the state finals in Indianapolis and have a drink and some food before we head back to South Bend. And inevitably, the UCLA team was on in the NCAA tournament, and they were winning beating somebody badly. So Bill and I had always talked about, gee, I wonder if we just talk to Johnny Wooden personally, having seen what he does on the court. So one year, 2 years later, we were at Chicago Stadium doing a basketball game, and UCLA was on first. So we had the chance to sit down at the bench near Johnny Wooden. So Johnny is there. Once upon a time in Chicago Stadium, the hockey rink was there, and the basketball court was laid over it.
Right.
So a little chilly. So Wooden is there, and he had the 4-buckle galoshes that we in Indiana are familiar with.
Yes.
He had a huge coat. He had a cap pulled down around his ears. He had a scarf and big gloves. And Johnny Wooden never used profanity. Right. He had a rolled-up program, and he's there at the stand. We're watching him perform, and he's saying, "God darn it, ref. Doggone it. You measured to that. Now, come on, ref." And it's really sort of interesting because many of the other games we had done, a lot of coaches used more than golly gee and doggone it. Yeah. So we reminisce about meeting him. So a man at South Bend Central High School, I had given a talk at the Kiwanis Club the following year. And he and I were fairly good friends, and he came over after I had talked, and he said, "I have a friend of mine coming in for the summer for a couple of weeks with his wife. He is fairly well known, Bill. Would you like to talk to him?" I said, "Well, who would that be?" "Johnny Wooden."
Oh, really?
My friend's friend who had come in there year after year, and I always looked forward to meeting the man. And he was outstanding. He just was really fabulous.
Yeah, because, it's unfortunate today, that's another good book is The Wizard of Westwood.
Yes.
and how he put all those great teams together at UCLA. He was an amazing man and an Indiana guy.
Yeah.
Grew up and, went to, Martinsville?
Yes.
High school,
Purdue.
Purdue, so coached at Indiana State, coached at South Bend Central.
It's sort of interesting. I asked him a story about, I talked about some of the great players he had. Lou Alcindor, Kareem Jabbar, Bill Walton, and South Bend Central's Mike Warren. And he sort of smiled and he said, I have a story I'd like to tell you about Bill Walton. And you may have heard this. If I'm being repetitive, please excuse me, but he said Walton came back one year and he was sort of a free spirit, and his hair very long, and he said when we start practicing, coach, and Johnny said, "Well, your hair is a little long, isn't it, Bill?" And he said, "Well, hey, everybody has a right to do what they want to do, right, coach?" And Johnny Wooden said, "That's absolutely correct. I'm the coach, and I have the right to play anybody I want to play." Next day, Walton came back, his hair was cut.
Yeah.
You heard that, right?
Yeah, but that's a great story because, the amazing thing about Johnny Wooden, as coach's face, there was a lot of different personalities that he had to deal with there, and with Walton, with Lou Alcindor, which became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and it's just some amazing stories in the run that Johnny Wooden had it in his career. So he was a fabulous person.
I enjoyed meeting him, and then a little later on, I'll tell you the story about Dan. He came into the Big Brothers luncheon, and he was really great. And Hornig and he were drinking Chardonnay, and they drank a lot of Chardonnay. And what I did at the dinners, I had them do a Q&A after speaking for about 10 minutes. So Meredith had a couple of questions from the audience, and he was in a Police Story, a television movie at that time. And they wanted to know about Angie Dickinson. And so he said, let me tell you about one of the stories about Angie Dickinson and our program. And he said, I was in this hospital bed, and we had this scene where she came over and told me, I got to get well, but you have to get back to work. And we blew this scene about 5-10 times, and finally the director said, hey, stop, take a break, we'll come back, we'll try one more time. So that time, he said, I'm in the bed, and Angie came over and she said, hey, if you don't do this and get this right, if you do get it right, I'll da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And after he said that, he realized that we had a chaplain there at the table with us. And he turned and he said, Father, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to speak like that. And the priest, really neat guy, he said, that's all right, I've heard worse than that. That's sort of funny, really. But,
that's a great story. You know, and one thing about it, and I still to this day, you know, we've learned over the years on Monday Night Football, but some great commentary has been done over the years. But with Cosell and Dandy Don and Frank Gifford, those guys were outstanding. And of course, we lost Frank Gifford this past year, an outstanding person, a great role model. And
I mentioned him in that book, and I also sent a copy to Kathy Lee.
Oh, okay.
Because he of the three people, I don't want to minimize how the impression was on the others, but Gifford was like for want of a better term, a gentleman's gentleman. When I called him to invite him over to do it, and we usually paid an honorarium and expenses, he said, no, I have a friend of mine fly me over in his jet, and he said, when is the date? I told him, he said, I'll be there. And he came in, and he spent almost 45 minutes signing autographs, talking to people after we were finished. Just a fabulous, fabulous man.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Pat O'Brien. I know he's near and dear to your heart as far as his life and everything. Let's talk a little bit about your experience with Pat O'Brien.
When I was a little guy, about 10 years old, I used to go to the movies on Saturday afternoon and watch Pat O'Brien and Jimmy Cagney and the movies at that time. And I had always respected the man a great deal. And he came to Notre Dame one spring to do an industrial motivation film. And Moose Krause, who was the athletic director at Notre Dame at that time, asked me if I wanted to interview him. And I, yes, certainly, I sure would like to. And so O'Brien came over, and he just a wonderfully kind, gentle person. And I told him what I wanted to do, and so we went over to the Morris Inn, which is a hotel on the campus there. And I put him in the patio, and I put the Golden Dome in his background. So when you looked at him speaking, you were looking over his shoulder at the Golden Dome, referencing the Rockney movie he had starred in, and George Gipp, Ronald Reagan.
Right.
And he was really great. And on television, you know, you only have about 4 or 5 minutes every night. So I ran a series of him 5 nights in a row because I did about 10, 12 minutes with him. So at the end, I thanked him for being on with the people of Michiana, northern Indiana, and southern Michigan, our coverage area. And he said, well, it's my honor and pleasure to do it. And Bill, I'd like to leave you with this for you and the people who've been kind enough to watch. And he said, may the road be always downhill. May the wind be always at your back. May the rain fall soft upon your fields. And may the sun always shine warm upon your face. And may God always hold you and yours in the hollow of his hand. And it was like, we were spellbound, my photographer and I, for a while. And so I did do one thing. I stole that from him, and I always gave him credit because from then on, anytime I went to a pep session or a luncheon or anywhere else where I talked, I always said, I want to leave you with this, the Ronald Reagan final farewell. And it was just great.
That's outstanding. Well, we've run out of time here and with Hamilton County Newsmakers, but Bill, tell us one more time, Good Night, Good Sports book that you just came out, only been out, a couple, 3 weeks?
Yes.
Tell us where you can get that book, and I think you have a signing coming up too, right?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. At the Noblesville Library on March 15th, which is a Tuesday at 6:30. And if you'd like it, I'll sign anything on the book for you, dedicate to someone. And other than that, it's at Amazon.com under books, under my name, Bill Etherton, or Good Night and Good Sports.
And it's on the ticker on the screen there. But we appreciate you coming, and there's many stories, and I would imagine that we could sit here and talk for hours and hours to Bill about Notre Dame and how blessed he's been to have the opportunity coming out of the service and getting the opportunity to work at Notre Dame. And I know it's a real passion and a real love for you. And I know there's a lot of great Notre Dame fans out there all over the country. And there are a lot of football fans that love the story about Notre Dame. And I appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule and coming to Hamilton County TV and visiting us today. I really appreciate that, Bill.
Terry, thank you, and thank you, Jim, and I appreciate it very much.
All right, so this is Perry Williams, and I'll be back next week with Hamilton County Newsmakers.